In today's lesson, we're going to look at Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes. You might need some paper or a notebook, something to write with, and a highlighter. A copy of the poem in front of you might be useful as well. So first of all, some context then about Ted Hughes himself. So he was born in 1930 and died in 1998. He grew up in rural Yorkshire, which means that he was quite passionate about animals and nature. He was devoted to writing and poetry from a young age. He was particularly inspired by the Romantic poets, poets like Percy Shelley. So we can expect to see those similar themes in his poetry as well, with a big emphasis on nature. His father served in World War I, which, as we'll see, is significant to the events of the poem and perhaps might have influenced some of the things we see in the poem itself. He was also Poet Laureate between 1984 until he died in 1998, so he was the national poet for the country, if you like. Some vocab about the poem then, so we'll come across this word patriotic. It's a word that's mentioned in the poem and it's also one of the key themes as well. It means that you are devoted to your country and you have a lot of support for your country as well, which we'll see is particularly significant with the soldiers in World War I in the poem. As usual then, we have a number of steps we could follow to annotate the poem. I'll read them to you very quickly. So you might look at the title of the poem and what's suggested. We'll then have a read through of the poem with a highlighter in hand, making any notes about any words and phrases that we come across and what they might suggest. After a couple of read-throughs of the poem, you might have a gist of what themes there are there any recurring themes in here, and how can we link this back to power and conflict. We might want to look at the perspective of the poem and what significance that has. We could also look at how it's structured. Is there anything that's revealed to us? And then lastly, we can have a look at the analysis of language. What word choices or what devices have been used, and what do they suggest? Is there any further meaning implied? We won't go over those exactly step by step in the video, but you'll see through some of the annotations that we make during the explanation that lots of those questions are answered for us. Let's start to analyse the poem then. So first of all, I'm going to read it through to you, and then we'll break down what's actually happening in the poem. Suddenly he awoke and was running, in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye, sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. In bewilderment then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statuary in mid-stride. Then the shot slashed furrows, threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame, and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide, open silence, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge. King, honour, human dignity, etc., dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm. To get out of that blue crackling air, his terror's touchy dynamite. So if we go back to the title of the poem then, Bayonet Charge, linking back to our context from earlier, we know that Ted Hughes' father fought in World War I, and bayonets were often a weapon that soldiers would use in World War I. So despite this poem being written in 1957, the events of it suggest happen in World War I. It might have been influenced by Ted's own experiences of his father fighting in World War I. Ted Hughes also, as we saw, was born in 1930, so whilst he wasn't directly involved in the wars himself, he certainly would have seen the aftermath of those, and he would have seen a community that was perhaps affected by those. The poem itself then opens up with the word suddenly, which implies that there's no prior warning. For the soldiers, they're expected to immediately go over the top and start to head towards where the conflict is happening. We then see that as the soldier is moving, he starts to stumble, which is probably to be expected as he's only just woken up. But there's a sense that the soldier himself isn't quite with it yet. He's still trying to wake up and trying to focus on what he has to do. It says in the distance he can see the green hedge, it dazzled with rifle fire, so he's starting to hear and see the conflict up ahead. At the minute though, this is not directly where he is, it's quite far away from him, so he can sense it, but he's not directly involved in it. We get from this quote a sense of the force of conflict, that the bullets themselves are smacking the belly out of the air. They're personified. It suggests how loud the bullets are. The next line is quite interesting then. He uses a simile here. He lugged a rifle numb as a smashed arm. Now this could be symbolic of a soldier having to carry his rifle around with him at all times, and it almost has become part of him. Our next couple of lines then, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye. I'm going to look at this word here, patriotic, as we know from earlier, means to love your country or to be devoted to your country. We'll see this reinforced later as well, as perhaps suggests that he's trying to hang on to the reasons for him fighting, like he needs a reminder. He's not quite sure of why he's there, he has to think back to the reasons. In our next stanza then, it starts off with in bewilderment, again suggesting that the soldier is confused, perhaps linking back to this earlier phrase of him needing to reassure himself of why he might be fighting. Another simile has been used a few lines down where he says he's running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. And again, this simile could suggest that he's trying to remind himself of why he's fighting. He's comparing this to the experience of having a nightmare, and when you start to wake up and come out of that nightmare, you then slow down or question what you were scared of in the first place. And this is what this soldier starts to do. He questions why he's there in the first place. And he almost freezes here because of this thought. He can't carry on because of what he's starting to question. If we go to our last stanza then, we then see this link to nature that we mentioned in our context from earlier. So it then says, threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame. So in the opening line of this stanza, we see that nature has been dragged into conflict. Prior to the war, prior to this conflict, the fields would have belonged to nature, but now, because of the conflict that humans have created, nature is being dragged into that. The description of the hair itself is quite interesting. It has its mouth wide, open, silent, its eyes standing out, almost startled or confused, and we can perhaps draw similarities here to the soldier himself, almost suggesting that what he's doing is unnatural. Despite this happening though, he still keeps going past it and he still keeps charging towards this hedge. He still keeps following his orders. These next couple of lines might give us a bit more of an insight into the soldier's thought processes. So we have this list of things here: king, honour, human dignity, etc. And they drop like luxuries. So we have another simile that's been used here. Now, similar to how we saw earlier with the patriotic tear from stanza 1, these things could be him reminding himself of why he's fighting for king and country, for his own honour, because he feels like it's perhaps the right thing to do. But the ending of that line, etc., which obviously we use to show there's more of something, might suggest that he's forgotten those reasons, or there are things at the minute he can't think about. A couple of example questions then you could use to have a go at practicing writing about the poem itself. If you just want to take the poem in isolation, you could look at how Hughes presents ideas about conflict just in this poem. The exam will ask you to complete a comparison essay. So if you want to start comparing it to some of the others, you could have a look at question number 2. How do poets present ideas about conflict in Bayonet Charge and one other poem that you've studied? And a couple of these that this might compare nicely to, particularly with the theme of conflict, could be Exposure, Charge of the Light Brigade, War Photographer and Kamikaze. Lastly then, well done for making your way through this video, and just a reminder that every bit of revision you do between now and your exams will be beneficial. I've been Tom, thank you for watching.